One of the core tenets of Christianity is the doctrine of the full deity and the full humanity of Jesus. Some throughout church history, as early as the first century, believed that Jesus was God, but that he wasn't fully human. They believed that this was incompatible and instead claimed that Jesus only appeared to be man in the flesh, but wasn't really a man. This was called Docetism, and the idea was circulating in the first century so much that John specifically addressed it in his gospel and epistles. Not only did he make the shocking statement that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, but in chapter 4 of his first epistle, John writes, "Every spirit that confesses that Jesus has come in the flesh is from God, and every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God." Wayne Grudem explains in Bible Doctrine that if Jesus had not been a man, he could not have died in our place and paid the penalty that was due to us. He cites Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16 and 17, which says, "Surely it is not with angels that he is concerned, but with the descendants of Abraham. Therefore he had to be made like his brethren in every respect, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God, to make expiation for the sins of the people." There are plenty of verses in the New Testament stating Jesus' humanity, like John chapter 1, verse 14, Colossians chapter 2, verse 9, Philippians chapter 2, verse 6 through 8, and Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14. But I'm focused on those passages that show the raw humanity of Jesus during his time on earth from the perspective of eyewitnesses. Those sobering verses that pop out and make you realize that Jesus was fully man. The first verse is John chapter 4, verse 6, where we read that Jesus became tired. It reads, "He left Judea and departed again for Galilee, and he had to pass through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, so Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour, which was noon." You know, in this story, Jesus had to travel a long way. This was something that people did in that time. They didn't have cars. You know, they had long distances between regions that Jesus was traveling, and so he had a long journey that he had to walk, and at about noontime, he got tired. He was exhausted from walking all morning, and so he took a break and sat by a well. We also read that Jesus got tired and slept just like you and me in Matthew chapter 4 and in chapter 8, and in Luke chapter 8 and Mark chapter 4, we all read that Jesus even slept during heavy rainstorms while aboard a boat. The second verse we're going to look at is Matthew chapter 4, verse 2, where we read that Jesus became hungry. Yes, Jesus became hungry like you and me. It reads, "Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry." Which to me is the biggest Captain Obvious moment in the entire Bible. Yes, of course, after 40 days and 40 nights, he was very hungry. Jesus got hungry just like we do, and he ate and he drank. We can read instances of Jesus eating food in Luke chapter 24, verse 42 and 43, Luke chapter 11. We can read in Matthew chapter 26, verse 26, the dinner in the upper room, and other places. Jesus ate. Remember, he multiplied the food for the 4,000. He was feasting at the wedding at Cana. So Jesus ate. He got hungry just like we do. The third verse we're going to look at is Luke chapter 4, verse 1, where we read that Jesus was tempted. We just read this in Matthew as well, but from Luke we read, "And Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness for 40 days, being tempted by the devil." Now, your first reaction might be, well, wait a minute, Kurt. Didn't I read in James chapter 1, verse 13 that God cannot be tempted by evil? And wasn't Jesus God? But then again, I'll just point you back to Hebrews chapter 2, verse 17 and 18, and Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15. So the point is we must treat the term tempted correctly, and we've got to read in each place, including the James verse, in context to understand what it means. In this way, all these temptations instigate a response from the sin nature in man, of which Jesus had none. The devil was tempting Jesus in his humanity. That was, at the time, weak from hunger, trying to have Jesus use his power to feed his flesh. Could Jesus have sinned in his humanity? Well, Jesus, being both God and man, were one person. If his humanity was separate, it could have willed to do what it wanted. But the humanity of Christ cannot be separated from his deity. His spirit ruled over his flesh in everything. Therefore, he was without sin. He experienced the pressure, the anguish of temptation through his humanity, but he never gave in even the slightest to this instigation. So while he maintained his deity in that he could not be tempted as if he could fail, he experienced what we do every day, that spiritual warfare from Satan, from the enemy, the pressure of temptation. The fourth verse is John 11, verse 35, where we read that Jesus cried. It reads, "Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, 'Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died.' When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, 'Where have you laid him?' And they said to him, 'Lord, come and see.' Jesus wept." So even Jesus got emotional when he saw the pain of his dear friend's loss. Martha and Mary and Lazarus were folks that Jesus spent so much of his time with during his ministry. So when Jesus saw them and Lazarus had died and he saw them all mourning over him and weeping, Jesus was deeply moved, and yes, Jesus wept. The fifth verse is Luke chapter 22, verse 44, where we read that Jesus became distressed and anguished. It reads, "And he, Jesus, withdrew from them, his disciples, about a stone's throw, and knelt down and prayed, saying, 'Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done.' And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling to the ground." Wow. This dramatic scene comes on the Mount of Olives after the supper in the upper room, and just before Jesus is about to be betrayed and arrested, and the next day crucified. Here we read that Jesus was in great distress, so much that he was sweating, quote, "like great drops of blood." Now, it's important to point out that this specific detail is unique to Luke's account, and some manuscripts are alleged not to have the phrase. But the sweat falling like drops of blood has been speculated about. Some people consider Luke's description as just a mere simile. Jesus' sweat fell to the ground in large, heavy drops, the way that blood drips from an open wound. However, there does exist a medical condition that produces these symptoms described and explains Luke's mention of blood. Hematidrosis, and I don't know if I'm saying that right, hematidrosis is a rare but very real medical condition that causes one to sweat. That causes one's sweat to contain blood. And Luke, the gospel writer, was in fact a physician. The cause of hematidrosis is extreme anguish. In the other gospel accounts, we see the level of Jesus' anguish described this way. In Matthew chapter 26, verse 38, Jesus says, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." So next time you're in deep despair, physical despair and anguish, stress, just remember that Jesus went through the same thing. He can relate to you in that way, in that human way. I mean, just imagine knowing that you were soon going to be tortured and killed with the wrath of God falling upon you for the sins of all humanity for all time. That is some serious anguish and despair. Well, that is the 5 best Bible verses I found showing the humanity of Jesus. If you can think of any more, go ahead and comment them down below. And if I get enough likes on this video, I'll do a part 2 where I show the 5 best Bible verses showing the deity of Jesus. I'll see you all next time. Grace and peace.